It's been a very long ride. I've been there from the beginning, and I'm happy to talk about that. But now we are joined with everyone. Everyone's here, full house. We also have, my fellow colleagues, Mikhail Klementov and Nathan Grayson. Please introduce yourselves.
Mhm. Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Nathan Grayson. I'm also a video game reporter at the Washington Post, and have been covering and following the story in varying capacities.
Hi, everyone. I am Mikhail Klementov. I'm an editor at Launcher, the Washington Post's video game and esports team. And I was the lucky one who started the story this morning on the Microsoft Activision acquisition, which I think, like everyone else, caught me completely by surprise. It was a very bizarre way to start my morning.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was just saying as we are waiting for people to get in, is that it was the very first thing that happened this morning. It was very shocking. I'm glad you were there to cover it, Mikhail. I mean, yeah, we can just start off for people who are just, jumping in, not knowing what happened. Maybe just like a quick summary of what's going on, and being the person who started the article, Mikhail, maybe you can like get us started.
Sure. I mean, the most basic facts of the news of the day is that this morning, I believe the timestamp on the Microsoft blog that went up was 8:26 a.m. or something very close to that.
Hmm.
Microsoft announced that it was acquiring or planning to acquire Activision Blizzard. It's a very fine distinction, but the acquisition is not final until next year in June or July. Don't remember exactly which month. Um, that it was planning on doing this acquisition, that it also announced that Game Pass, its subscription service, had surpassed 25 million users. It announced and kind of explicitly connected the Activision Blizzard acquisition to its Game Pass service and said, hey, we're excited to bring a lot of these games, franchises, and future offerings to Game Pass. There were questions in those press releases, or not questions rather, but there was some kind of inconclusive phrasing that I think was pretty intentional by Microsoft around the status of Bobby Kotick, the current CEO of Activision Blizzard. There's still some lingering questions around whether he stays on once the acquisition is finalized. There are some reports that suggest that he's planning on leaving. Uh, Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, for their part, have been pretty mum on that. So it's not really clear what his status is going to be. But I think those are the basics of the story right now. Those are kind of the spark notes. Is there anything I've missed, Nathan, Shannon, Rachel, that you think is really essential to this story?
I mean, the big thing that I think, looms heavy over all of this is the fact that Activision Blizzard is facing serious allegations and other things concerning basically pervasive harassment and other like discrimination within the workplace. It's being investigated, by multiple government bodies, and so like a lot of that is looming, especially heavy over Bobby Kotick, who is the aforementioned CEO. And there's been a lot of pressure for him to leave the company, and so this is a case in which, if indeed he does leave once the Microsoft acquisition is complete, assuming does complete, which is not necessarily a foregone conclusion, then that will also mean that like on one hand, people will get what they wanted on that front. On the other hand, he's likely to receive, some pretty serious compensation on his way out. So, it's a fairly complicated situation on that front.
Yeah,
Shannon, can you actually? Oh, sorry. Can you? You're the expert on this. I think this is probably exactly what you were about to say. Can you run us through that litany of charges against Activision Blizzard right now? There's an investor complaint, a lawsuit. Give us the rundown.
Yeah, thanks, Mikhail. And this goes back to Rachel's question for the people who just joined earliest of all. What has been happening at Activision Blizzard? So much is going on since the July 20th lawsuit and last year. California state sued Activision Blizzard, alleging sexual harassment, gender-based discrimination, and many women came forward and shared their stories with California state, and then that was included in the lawsuit. And I ended up talking to over 17 Activision, at this point, dozens of Activision Blizzard employees about their experiences, facing harassment at the company, and just going through this frat boy corporate culture, as they call it, in the suit. And following that lawsuit, then there was also a lawsuit from shareholders saying that that the company had misled shareholders, and also the company was trying to settle with the Economic Equal Opportunity Commission for $18 million, and California State was like, no, you can't do that, and tried to interfere. So there's an ongoing battle between two different between the federal organization and also a state level agency over what Activision Blizzard should do, and who should actually, how much money should they pay these alleged victims of these issues. And following that, there's also been a lot of calls to, call Activision Blizzard CEO Bobby Kotick to resign, because, just a couple months ago, Wall Street Journal put out an article, maybe even just last month, actually. Sorry, time is flying. That, Bobby Kotick actually knew about sexual misconduct allegations at his company and didn't tell the board of directors for 3 years until that lawsuit was public in July, and then he had to explain. So people have been calling for, employees at the company, shareholders. So many people have called for Kotick to resign. And today, with this news of Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard, the fate of Kotick is also, up in the air. And we heard a couple things about it. I wonder if anyone wants to speak to, what we know so far at the company. Both, Microsoft and Activision Blizzard share emails, and they've said some things, but what do we know so far?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting thing. So the official word at this point is that Kotick is going to stick around through the transition. There's no official word yet on what happens after that. But at the moment, the sort of line Microsoft is putting out is that, they are satisfied with Bobby Kotick. Let's see, the official quote from the current head of Microsoft is, over more than 30 years as CEO of Activision Blizzard, Bobby Kotick has built the company into one of the world's most successful and influential entertainment companies, and I'm grateful to his leadership and commitment to real culture change, which is a bit interesting bit of phrasing, given that the basic idea around people calling for his resignation is that he is in large part responsible for building the culture of kind of harassment and abuse that has been revealed by recent investigations. And so the idea that he is also heading up that change is questionable to a lot of people, because it seems like he might not be somebody capable of pulling that off, or even somebody with a real incentive to make it happen in a meaningful way. But for the moment, Microsoft is nonetheless sticking with the line that, they're keeping him on board, he's a valuable asset, so on and so forth. So that's what they're saying. But there have also been reports from publications like the Wall Street Journal suggesting that at the end of that transition period, he will be on the way out. It remains to be seen how that will happen, because, again, a lot of this won't be completed until 2023. So there's time for things to change. There's also time for there to be ripple effects if indeed Kotick leaves. I think one of the things that people are kind of curious about, for example, is the fate of the esports arm of Activision Blizzard, which includes the Overwatch League and the Call of Duty League, and questions are surrounding that, because at least among people who sort of are part of those scenes, those leagues are considered to be something of a pet project for Kotick, because he likes to be part of kind of the sports world and that surrounding community. And so because those leagues have never really been like a big money generator in the same sense as Activision Blizzard's major game franchises, there are now questions about hey, once Microsoft sort of takes the wheel, will they hold on to these things, or will they say, Activision Blizzard tried what they could with them, but it's time to sunset them? But again, that's fairly dependent on what happens on the fate of Bobby Kotick, and we don't know that yet.
Yeah, and I think that actually, speaks to Rachel's reporting, and one of the reasons why we collaborated with Rachel so much today. I really wanted to know, because you actually wrote an article about Microsoft reviewing its sexual harassment policy, and I wanted to know, how that could possibly relate to the Activision Blizzard story, if at all. And that's one of the questions I asked you. So I'm wondering if you can kind of provide clarity to the audience too that might be wondering the same thing.
Yeah, it was interesting because late last year, a shareholder proposal actually passed at Microsoft's annual meeting, basically calling for a review of Microsoft's gender discrimination and its sexual harassment policies. So Microsoft has now hired an outside, law firm to look into these policies to see if there's any improvements to be made, if what's going on is working, and to release kind of a transparency report there. Microsoft, pretty much every big tech company, has had a lot of allegations of gender discrimination, sexual harassment within its ranks. Of course, we know that, women and underrepresented minorities are still, underrepresented at tech companies. And so this review that Microsoft is currently undergoing will probably be released in the spring. So that's long before Activision joins. So this review won't look over any of Activision's policies, but it's possible, if Microsoft does this again in the future, then it would take those into account.
Yeah, and I think that's really good color to have because honestly, I think a lot of people, just assumed the news of that sexual harassment review policy review, and this acquisition news came, days after one another, and perhaps they were related. So I'm glad. Thank you for clarifying.
Right.
The timing is interesting, but it is. I mean, Microsoft is pretty clearly responding directly to a shareholder proposal that passed there with that review. I also just think on the acquisition generally, Microsoft used to sort of have a reputation of not treating its acquired companies super well, or like folding them in together or breaking them apart and putting them different places. But in recent years, that reputation has really reversed. And, I think that people largely have been happy with the way that Microsoft has kind of left LinkedIn alone, for example, or preserved Minecraft as a popular game. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, how much they touch the Activision Blizzard games and like what that looks like and how much they plan to remake the business or let it continue to succeed.
Yeah, and that's also another good point to make is that Microsoft has been in recent years making a lot of video game company related acquisitions. Activision Blizzard is far, far from alone here. In recent years, they've also picked up the biggest other acquisition they made is Bethesda, which is the creator of series like Fallout, or not creator of Fallout, but they now shepherd Fallout forward, and then the Elder Scrolls and games like that, and that was for around $7 billion. And then they also picked up Double Fine, which is a very well respected and beloved developer who's created series like Psychonauts, Obsidian, a major like role playing game development studio. And so they've done all of these, and so far they've kept them relatively they've not folded them in. And I think the way that maybe a lot of people were afraid of, where these studios would lose their individual and unique identities and just become content mills. They are still, at least from the outside looking in, individual studios that kind of, have their own creative cultures. So, at least that part of it kind of speaks well for Activision Blizzard's future under Microsoft. That said, there's still other questions about Activision Blizzard itself. And then beyond that, in the meantime, the other, I think, big sort of cultural question we have to ask is Activision Blizzard among video game companies, and as you were saying, I think among tech companies, is far from unique in being a sort of, culture that is plagued by issues in terms of anything from abuse and harassment to discrimination against minorities and other marginalized groups. In video games, that is a fairly prominent problem, as I think has been sort of apparent in terms of the output of the industry for a long time, just in terms of a lot of games featuring, white male protagonists and stuff like that. But then also in terms of in recent years, investigations into companies like Riot Games, creator of League of Legends. And then more recently, there have been reports on studios like Sony or the history of companies like Twitch, which is a live streaming platform tied into games, where again, there have been allegations of rampant gender-based discrimination and frat boy culture, as Shannon put it earlier in regards to Activision Blizzard. And so you see a company where you see Microsoft acquire Activision Blizzard, and you know that Microsoft has been in games for a long time, and you have to look at their other gaming-based acquisitions and wonder, even if Activision Blizzard is now under a new umbrella, are they under an umbrella that also has similar pervasive cultural issues? Because these are so widespread within the games industry.
Right, and I think in an investor call today, Microsoft tried to address the question of culture, and they said that Activision Blizzard is making progress, and they accept that progress. But it becomes an open question of what actually is changing inside that company's culture. And Activision Blizzard employees I've spoken to are not happy with this news because they say the CEO Bobby Kotick should have resigned. And it is still not clear to them if he will stay with the company because he's already announced in an email to employees that he would at least stay for the time being. And then, if there's more past when the deal is completed, if he's going to leave, that part has not been announced yet. But I also wanted to mention quickly that, Microsoft also acquired Mixer, another live streaming platform, and that did not turn out as well as, the kind of studios you're
No, it did
describing, right?
not. That turned out incredibly poorly in the end, albeit in ways that were kind of mystifying because Microsoft acquired that and then seemingly pumped quite a lot of money into it to pick up some major video game influencers in Tyler Ninja Blevins and Michael Shroud. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because it is very European. But yeah, so they made those acquisitions in terms of signing streamers to exclusive deals in 2019 and then folded the platform in summer of 2020 kind of out of nowhere in a way that took everybody on that platform by surprise. That seemed to be it's hard to say exactly what happened there in terms of Microsoft's business kind of trajectory, but I think that also their video game company acquisitions are pretty separate from that, especially in regards to what seems to be their ultimate goals, which right now I think what they're trying to do, as we said earlier, is build out their offerings for things like Xbox Game Pass, which is their major subscription service, basically, or subscription streaming service. The idea being that much like Netflix, you can subscribe for a relatively small fee and then have access to a bunch of different video games that you can play on platforms far-ranging as your Xbox itself or your PC or your phone, or I think soon also like your television sans any sort of console. And so Microsoft obviously wants to be at the forefront of that kind of a business because I think they see a coming sea change in the way that games are bought and sold and consumed. And they say okay, well, we want to be functionally speaking the Netflix of games. And so they buy up a lot of studios, as they've been doing for the past couple of years, to create a kind of endless stream of content for that, much like Netflix does with its own original series. And so this is Microsoft's kind of biggest move in that direction yet, of saying we are going to take all these games that aren't just big names, but also that themselves are kind of services in the way that they run and that they're constantly updated, they're constantly adding new content, and they're going to say this is now part of our big offering. If you buy in with us, then you get some of the biggest games in the world that also never stop growing and changing.
I want to actually broaden the conversation a tiny bit, even beyond Game Pass, because I find the party line around this acquisition a bit fascinating. The first element of that is Bobby Kotick going into interviews and saying, I'm just as excited as always to go to work and do my lovely job, which strains credulity a tiny bit. But the other part of the kind of company line right now is that, this is Xbox kind of lending Activision a hand, that Activision has all of these huge, expansive interests around the metaverse, around artificial intelligence and machine learning and all of these other technologies. And Bobby Kotick looked at the landscape and realized, we don't actually have the resources to handle this. We need the help of a company like Microsoft to bring us into, Web3, the next century, whatever metaphor or buzzword you want to use. And I want to kind of open this to the group and maybe particularly to Rachel, who will kind of have the business acumen to kind of examine that question. Does that scan for the other reporters on this call? Does that make sense?
I mean, I think that the big tech companies in our world are just so huge that even, large mid-sized companies are going to have a hard time competing with them. So joining forces with a giant like Microsoft, gives that power and those resources to Activision. But I think it goes the other way too. I think that if Microsoft wants to make a dent here, Activision is going to be a huge resource for them when it comes to that, especially as we move toward the buzzword of the metaverse, which, as we know, doesn't super exist yet, but lots of tech companies are prioritizing it. And if Microsoft wants a strong foothold there, having this huge gaming company under its belt can only help with that.
Yeah, and I just want to add from the business perspective, that analysts have said that Activision Blizzard, as a result of all of this negative press it received last year, and also just the lawsuits, the things that are happening, people's allegations, Activision Blizzard last week at market close, it was each share cost $65 per share, which was pretty low, compared to this nearly $69 billion deal, which values each stock share at about $90. So that's much higher. And even with this news that Microsoft is buying Activision Blizzard, then the stock price rose about 30%, over 36% before market open today. So, it was clear that people, like investors, were excited about this news. Wall Street was happy about this news, and Microsoft actually got a deal buying Activision Blizzard after just months and months of this company facing so many lawsuits and so many people, calling for the CEO to resign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of the, that's the version of the story, or like the way to look at it, that is kind of like a little bit, if not sobering, then, it's not necessarily great in terms of like the ethicality of it all, that somebody like Bobby Kotick can at least, allegedly run a company in such a way that it creates a pervasive culture of kind of, harassment and other similar cultural issues, and then ultimately make a major sale and, make a lot of money after all of this criticism of that culture. And basically that criticism resulted in the stock price dipping, which allowed a major company to move in and make a purchase. Like, it's a feedback loop of rewards born of, again, alleged misconduct, which is, not great.
One thing that I find remarkable, and Shannon, I want you to weigh in on this, is that Microsoft in its announcement said, we're really pleased with the way that, Activision Blizzard has been enacting reforms, pursuing change. And to me, the kind of most stark rejoinder to that is that the change that they implemented at the top of Blizzard, installing 2 new co-heads to that studio, which seemed like the kind of the bigger problem in Activision's portfolio of studios. Really, Blizzard was kind of the focal point there. And one of those studio heads left like a month after being installed, saying, I can't work here. The environment is still not good for me. Shannon, you did a lot of reporting around that. Can you kind of flesh out some of the details I left out there?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Mikhail. Yeah, so one of the co-heads at Activision Blizzard, at Blizzard itself, to replace J. Allen Brack, who had stepped down because, he was also already named in that July 20th lawsuit, and then he stepped down afterwards. And he was replaced by Mike Ibarra, who actually worked at Xbox, and also Jen O'Neill, who is both female and gay, and she actually there was an email that she sent that was read by the Wall Street Journal in the same article that alleged that Kotick didn't tell his board of directors about the sexual misconduct. The same article, there was an email that she had written saying that she was being discriminated. Jen O'Neill said she was being discriminated for being Asian and gay, and she was also being, underpaid compared to the other co-head, Mike Ibarra. And I talked to sources about this, and the reason why she was being underpaid is that when they were giving them the salaries, they just kept her at the same pay grade that she was receiving before, and they didn't like bump her up. And she had asked to be bumped up, and Activision Blizzard didn't really respond to that until she said, "I'm going to resign." And then they said, "Okay, well, we'll give you the money," but at that point, she said, "No, it's too late. I'm resigning." And it was 3 months after she had just been appointed in that new position. And that was very disheartening for all the sources I talked to see, because Jen O'Neill had been this kind of like beacon of hope for them that maybe this company can reform itself. Maybe they can improve work conditions over time. And in her kind of letter to employees as she was leaving the company, Jen O'Neill said she still believed in Blizzard, but just that she had to go somewhere else, and it wasn't announced where she would go. And people kind of read that statement and said, well, that's not very, hopeful or believable, because if you are hopeful, if you have faith in Activision Blizzard, then why would you leave? If you think that this company can improve, then why would you just quit and not tell us where you're going? And then that Wall Street Journal article came out, and people realized, okay, it's actually, maybe this is what really happened. And it just, caused all these employees to kind of further lose hope in their own company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's also talk about that for a moment, because Shannon, you've been doing a lot of, reporting on kind of efforts at Activision Blizzard and surrounding developers in terms of pushing back against elements of Activision Blizzard culture, and also the kind of, way that just the company functions around the work and their creative output, and especially like in regards to organizing, unionization. There's been like in the wake of everything happening at the company, a number of efforts that are collective action based, things like walkouts. Raven is currently doing a work strike in relation to some QA layoffs that happened a little while back. So, I mean, in relation to all of this, like, how do you see things going with regards to unionizing efforts now that Activision Blizzard is probably on the verge of being acquired by Microsoft? What is the sort of sense you're getting from people who are on that side of things, who are in favor of unionizing, who now are faced with this kind of seismic change at the company?
Yeah, that's also an excellent question. I think that's one that we definitely need to keep an eye on going forward. As I've written about before, Activision Blizzard workers are trying to unionize. They've been trying, for at least a while now, and they are working with the Communications Workers of America, this major media union, in their efforts. And they're also learning from last year, the very first video game union to actually video game studio to unionize came out, which is Vodio, which is a very small studio of just over a dozen people. And that studio had only been launched last year as well. So it's very new. And so these efforts are underway. Once Microsoft buys Activision Blizzard, that deal is expected to be completed by June 2023, pending regulatory approval. Then of course, the unions, any unions that would exist at that point would be under Microsoft's kind of authority, right? And if they approve of the union, obviously, then the union can go ahead. But there would be negotiations between them if that comes to pass. At this point, right now, while that deal is still pending, actually, Activision Blizzard said that they're autonomous from Microsoft, and currently it would be if a union were to emerge, it would be Activision Blizzard again, still looking over that union and seeing if they would approve. And also employees, workers, it's up to them if they want to sign a union card and join. So this is just a developing situation that we're going to keep covering, of course. And if you want the actual answer, you should read launcher.gg, of course. And yeah. And we also do live streams, and we're going to do another live stream on this exact topic, but more analysis on Thursday, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and the other thing there is that I think in cases like this, when a big company is buying out another company, there's also the question of what's going to happen when the new company takes over. Will there be layoffs? Will there be restructurings, other changes like that? And in these cases, having a union often protects employees. At least a strong union can ensure that employees are at least benefit, or at least have the benefit of things like, decent severance packages and other things like that in case they're laid off. So, I mean, I think that probably for employees at Activision Blizzard, there is maybe an increased incentive to unionize in the wake of this in order to protect themselves in case Microsoft wants to overhaul everything to better fit their vision. But that said, let's also briefly transition over to what kind of regulatory oversight looks like here. Again, we've been talking about this in preliminary terms as far as the buyout actually happening goes. It still has to get past the FTC and stuff like that. And so I guess what are the open questions here in terms of the buyout maybe not going through? Is there kind of an antitrust angle here? Is there something where basically the FTC could look at this and say, well, Microsoft is obviously one of the biggest companies in the world, and they're buying one of the biggest video game companies in the world, and they already own a bunch of the other ones. Are they verging on, being monopolistic in their actions?
So I think this is a super interesting question when it comes to this deal, because this deal is massive, right? It would be Microsoft's largest acquisition ever, which is amazing when you think about how long the company's been around. It's also one of the largest tech deals ever. And we're in this regulatory environment right now, where the federal regulators are taking a closer and closer look at all of the deals that are going through, and especially at the way the big tech companies are consolidating. So I think that, one of the reasons that Microsoft and Activision Blizzard are saying that this deal isn't going to close until summer of next year is because they're expecting a lengthy regulatory process. And, some of the experts that we talked to today say the same things. Microsoft has kind of sidestepped a lot of the antitrust scrutiny in recent years, certainly, in the last couple of decades since its huge antitrust battle with the government. But it's possible that tide is changing because obviously we have a newish administration and a renewed focus on trying to kind of crack down on some of the tech companies' power. So I think we're definitely going to see like a careful review of this deal.
One thing I'm sort of curious about is, do you think this deal rises as a priority for the FTC, for the government? Is this something that you see them taking on? What are some signs to you that would suggest, oh, the government is surely going to look into this versus, maybe this isn't such a big priority for them? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think it's really hard to speculate because we don't know exactly what other deals will be proposed within the same time frame. We don't know, kind of where the government has decided to throw its priorities. But I will say that just the pure size of this deal and the fact that it's coming from already one of the world's largest companies means that I would expect, at least some moderate level of review.
Hmm. Yeah, I was also curious about the ramifications of just today, very literally, the head of the Justice Department's antitrust division and the FTC announced that they're changing merger guidelines for their agencies to evaluate mergers, basically. And so I guess like the focus has been on they're changing the guidelines specifically around vertical acquisitions, or at least that's what the that's what the DOJ is doing, and the FTC is changing like horizontal merger guidelines. So basically, like, do you think that that factors into this, and do you think it's kind of auspicious timing that that happened literally today?
Kind of wild timing that it happened literally today, right? I kind of doubt that was planned, but who knows? But I think it just shows again how seriously the federal agencies are taking these concerns, and that we can't really write any of these major deals off as a given because I think that they're going to get some level of scrutiny.
Yeah, that's true. What other are there any other kind of like thoughts on this deal that you might have? Because I think, we've kind of summarized it pretty well. This has just like been very shocking across all the social media platforms I'm a part of. All my friends who are gamers are just like, what happens? Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard, and people who were like thinking about these companies 20 years ago, they would have never seen this coming. I wonder if anyone else is like thinking things that we've like left out that you would like to add.
I don't, I'm going to let everyone think on this a tiny bit by giving a sort of wishy-washy answer, which is that to me, we're going to see a lot of downstream effects necessarily because already this strikes me as, one of the biggest stories of the year for the gaming industry, just because like I'm trying to imagine in my I'm just trying to picture what kind of story, what magnitude that story would have to be to overshadow this. And I'm drawing blanks. Whereas kind of the ramifications of an acquisition like this and the year that it'll take for it to go through regulatory review, the year in which more revelations can come out around Activision, any number of the studios it owns and works with, Microsoft. Not to say, to be perfectly clear, I don't know anything about that, but just kind of forecasting that in a year, so many things can change, so many things can go differently, so many things can pop up. And these are such big players in the industry that already this is like a massive story. And in the coming weeks, we're probably going to start to see the first effects.
Mm. Yeah, I think also this is happening against the backdrop of a time of major change in the games industry. Again, Microsoft is not the only company buying up other companies. It is a time of kind of pervasive consolidation in the face of just a sea change in the way that games are played and purchased. And so, like, we're going to see more and more companies get bought up this way in pursuit of a future in which I think a lot of video game playing and purchasing occurs on streaming platforms. And so, like, this is not, the end of something. This is the start of, I think, a sea change that will leave the games industry looking fairly unrecognizable compared to how it is now in the next 5 or so years. I think that, and pardon an egregious pun that I just came up with, but, back in, like the 90s and 2000s, we had the console wars. Now we have the consolidation wars. So
I
that's
thought it
what we're
was a
looking
good
Boo!
pun.
at.
No, it was good.
Uh,
Boo!
I did it only for the reaction.
well, okay. Well, anyway, so yeah, I mean, I think like just like it was like 1 week ago that I was covering like Take Two, another major public video game company that, owns like Grand Theft Auto and like BioShock. And that company, bought the maker of Farmville, Zynga, and, that's going to expand its mobile gaming quite a bit. Mobile gaming offerings quite a bit, and that was already a historical deal. It was already like $12 billion, like the biggest video game acquisition we had ever seen. And now this one of like pretty much $69 billion of Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard, definitely overshadows that by a lot, by a long shot. And it seems like the games industry, as Nathan was saying, is that it's going to keep changing, and we're kind of left with less and less major mid-sized gaming companies, mid-sized at this point, because you're adding this like giant company with another giant company, and I guess you're just having like a behemoth compared to the mid-sized companies that are left in the landscape. And yeah, everything is really changing. But great. I don't know, Rachel, if I saw you unmute for a second, if you had something else that you wanted to add, but if not, we can like wrap up.
I literally just want to say that it's kind of wild and interesting to think about how sprawling Microsoft's empire has become, from the cloud and business software to LinkedIn to gaming.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. No, I really appreciate all of you coming here today. And again, we have a live stream at Launcher every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, hosted by Nathan Grayson and also me. And also sometimes Mikhail shows up. So you should definitely check it out. And yeah, have more analysis of games news because we do that every week.